Welcome everyone to another Excel series. My name is Alva, Santiago, and today we're going to be doing macros. Macros is a way of automating all those tedious steps you do every week or month, quarterly, on data that you have to bring into Excel to massage. Oftentimes you find yourself moving columns around, fixing formatting on your data set, and it's such repetitive actions. Why not record them into a macro that replays them back for you each time you need it? So let's get started. First of all, macros exist under the View tab. As you can see at the very end here, you have macros as the last group, and there are a few commands in here, but I rather use the Developer tab. I often use this one because I have more tools to work with, and the Developer tab is always available except is not on. It's considered like a customized feature in Excel. So in order to turn it on, it's not an add-in, it's already existing in your Excel. So just simply go to the File tab. You come down to Options on the left pane, and you click on Customize Ribbon. And on the right side, the right pane, just come down to Developer and make sure it's checkmarked. And simply click OK. And your developer ribbon will be visible now. On the developer ribbon, inside the code group, we have a Use Relative References button. The Use Relative References button is on when it's selected and shaded as such. When it is off, it is Absolute References. So you only have one button for both. And I will explain what those two are because they're quite important. So let's suppose I am starting to record. I'm not doing it yet. I'm just going to illustrate. If I was recording and I left it without being selected, the use relative reference, so now it's in absolute. And suppose my selector started here and now I click record macro. As soon as I start moving my selector around, like for instance, I clicked on Australian division, which is an A1, and I selected A1 through D1. And apply some feature on it like merge and center. And then I come down to A3 and I do something to the item field name. And I select Q1 through Q4 and do something else, some kind of other formatting to it. And then I stop recording. What I see in my code after I finish all of these selections and applying formatting is that it remembered what cells I clicked on. So it'll say that I clicked in A1 and then I selected from there to D1 and apply some formatting or merge and center in this case. And then that I went down to A3 and did something else, and finally B3 to E3. So it remembers the cell addresses, and whenever you replay this macro, it's absolutely going back to those same cells and doing the same action to the same cells. You can't forget that. So it doesn't matter where your selector is. It's always going to wind up back into the same cells that you started creating steps on. Versus the use relative references. When use relative references is on, as you see here is shaded, and I am going to create those steps again. And I'm pretending I click record macro. And now I get started and I click into A1. And then I select A1 through D1 and merge and center. And then I go to items and I do something else here. And then I go to B3 to E3 and I do something else. And then I stop recording. When I do this, this is what the code will show. That from the location I started, I moved over 4 columns to the left. And then it recorded that I moved 2 rows down from that position. And then I moved over 1 column and selected 4 columns from that position. It remembers movement relative to where I have my selector, how many columns, rows up or down, left or right I have chosen or clicked on. So that's very important when you're creating a macro, because suppose you start somewhere else and you have used the relative reference feature. Now it's going to start selecting from that position, wherever your selector is relative to where you start. It starts to move over and it's going to wind up in the wrong cell doing all the actions in the wrong place. And that could be very dangerous to your data because you're going to have a big mess on your hands. So it's important that you understand the difference between absolute and relative references when recording a macro. The best recourse is to always start your macro in absolute mode. By doing this, you know that it's always going to begin the macro where it's intended to begin. And so when I start and I want it to be in A1, it'll remember A1. And then from there, I can decide to change it to relative. So you can have a mix of both. This is step 1 of 4 macro videos because this macros is so big that it needs attention in every interval. Thank you and join me for step 2.